Good morning. Welcome to the St. Augustine Chronicles. Thank you for joining us today. My guest today is Charles Cox with the San Sebastian Winery. I'm curious to learn how opening a winery in Florida came about. That's seems like not the first thing people would think of to me, so I'm really curious about that. Before we get going with our interview, let's talk about our sponsors. The Kookaburra Coffee, proudly founded in St. Augustine in 2012, the Kookaburra is your local home for fresh roasted coffee and made from scratch baked goods. From legendary Aussie meat pies to scones and sweet pastries, everything is crafted to pair perfectly with their signature coffees. Whether you love a smooth flat white, a bold Aussie iced coffee, or their famous Honey Badger latte. With multiple locations throughout St. Augustine, the Kookaburra is part of the community and part of your daily routine, from morning commutes to weekend strolls. The Kookaburra, Aussie coffee, St. Augustine local. The second sponsor is 97 Park, residential and commercial real estate, my brokerage. Looking to buy, sell, or invest in property in St. Augustine? Trust 97 Park, your local residential and commercial real estate experts. From historic homes to business spaces and investment properties, 97 Park delivers market knowledge, smart strategy, and personalized service every step of the way. And when you're ready to make your move, contact me, Karen Zander, directly at 904-297-3471. 97 Park, real estate done right here in St. Augustine. Thank you, Blake Blevins, for writing those sponsor sheets. I appreciate it. All right, Charles, the first question I always ask is, what brought you to St. Augustine?
Wow. Well, I guess technically it was my job, but not the job as you know it now. The job I had then, I was 16 years old, and we had already opened our first winery in Tallahassee called Lafayette Vineyards, and I was delivering wine and actually would stop at places to see if other individuals wanted to purchase our wine to retail for us.
You were 16 and you were delivering and selling wine?
Yep.
Was it legal to do that?
There was kind of a little technicality that if you were the son of the ownership or a close relative, then you can actually work under the age of 18 or 21 or whatever they allow you to do that now.
Did your friends think you had the coolest job?
No, all my friends were enjoying life, I think, because I think I started working every spare time I had, summers or whatnot, after probably 12 years old. And from then forward, I was doing different jobs, usually at the winery, but I did have some other jobs with some other companies for some summers. But most of it was winery related. And that summer I was delivering wine, and I came over to St. Augustine to meet with part of the ownership that used to have Creekside Diner and some of those restaurants. There were three of them at the time.
Yep.
And had that meeting, kind of drove around St. Augustine and thought, this is a really cool town. And
you were 16 years old and you met with the owners of a group of 3 restaurants to try to sell them, I guess, the wines that you have. I mean, at 16?
They had actually seen our wines. We had a wine called Plantation White, and it had a picture of a goose on it on the label, and they liked it. And so they had actually called us, which was me at the time, in Tallahassee, and then I drove over and met with them.
And so your parents were good with you being in charge like that?
Well, I don't know that I was in charge of anything.
You came over by yourself to sell wine to restaurant owners.
Well, and then a couple of weeks later, I convinced my girlfriend's parents, she was 15, and my parents to let us come over by ourselves one Saturday. And so we got up early in the morning, drove over, spent the day here, did the alligator farm and all this stuff, and then drove back home.
I feel like you had to have been the envy of all of your friends. How is that not possible? What was wrong with your parents?
Things were a little different back then, and I don't know. We were raised to be fairly mature at a young age.
Yeah.
My sister was 5 years older than I am, and so I kind of grew up around her friends and whatnot. So a lot of influence there as well.
So you were 16 when you first came here.
Mm-hmm.
When did you sell the wine?
hmm Yeah, and stopped at a few places along the way, um, and met with them as well, and dropped off some samples. And sometimes we had some accounts that would take like 40 cases at a time, and a lot of them were kind of touristy, roadside orange places that sold oranges and that sort of thing, citrus stands. And so my dad had a Toyota 4Runner, and I could fit about 40 cases of wine in it, and so I would do those deliveries as well.
Was that like back in the 80s, maybe?
Let's see, if I was 16, it would have been 86.
Yeah, yeah. Um, how was the town different then? It was very seasonal, right?
Well, it was seasonal. I probably didn't know that necessarily at the time. I just kind of happened through one day, and it was obviously very historic, as it's always been, for anybody visiting after the settlers, and that's always kind of intrigued me a little bit. I actually went to school for architecture, so the architectural side was kind of intriguing to me. My family was in construction. My granddad was a commercial contractor. My dad worked for him for a while, doing construction until he went back to school and became a CPA. We had been to Europe several times by then, and so it obviously resembled a lot of what you'd see in Europe. So that was kind of neat, and just something you don't find very often in the United States traveling.
To me, I wasn't here in the 80s. I came in the 90s, but to me, it must have. I would guess that it would have felt like a small town, where now it doesn't necessarily feel like a small town to me. Maybe it's because I live here. I don't know, but it feels it's got a different vibe than a real small town.
Yeah, and I kind of always wonder about things like that. Once you've been entrenched in an area for a while, then probably you miss some of the charm of it just because you're doing your thing and you're working and whatnot, and you're just used to it. But you think people that show up here that have never been here before, they probably still see the charm of it and probably think it's a pretty small town, especially if they're from a bigger town.
Yeah. I moved here from Las Vegas, and when I lived in Las Vegas back in the 80s, it was still mafia run, and it was a small town. Like everybody knew everybody else, and you could call somebody and you could get something done, or you could get tickets to a show. Nobody paid when you lived there. Nobody paid to go anywhere. We all got comps. And now I don't like going back because it's not a small town at all anymore. It's all corporate. Back then, there were no corporate casinos. So, but because it was so seasonal back then, there just weren't the hotels and the attractions that there are now, right?
We went to the fort. We went to the alligator farm, and back then the alligator farm actually had an alligator wrestling show. So they would drag an alligator out of there, and they'd sit on its back and do all sorts of stuff. And you'd sit in a little thing of bleachers and watch, and we thought that was kind of cool. They don't do that anymore. I can imagine the insurance companies probably frowned upon that a good bit. but walked up St. George Street. A lot of the typical things you might do.
Were cars still on St. George when you first came here? Because it would have been sometime in the 80s.
I don't remember. I don't think so.
It was Ramel as mayor when they switched it over, so it was in the 80s sometimes. I think it was 80s, maybe early 90s, but I think 80s.
I don't remember where we parked either.
So you came here at 16. You sold wine successfully to the owners of Creekside. Was it Fiddler's Green and Saltwater Cowboys at the time, right?
We actually met at Fiddler's Green over at Bologna.
That's a shame that restaurant isn't there anymore.
Mm-hmm. That was a neat location.
It was a killer location.
When I moved back years later, it was already gone, and I was kind of thinking, "Oh wow, I thought that was the coolest one."
Well, the building was still there. You could have bought it.
Yeah, well,
how much would that have cost?
We got the other one instead.
So did you work at the wine? So wait a minute, let me backtrack. So you had a winery in Tallahassee? Mm-hmm. Because I just don't picture Florida as being the place to think, I'm going to put some grapes in the ground and have a winery. How does that work?
Not many people do or would have back then either. A friend of my dad's was an attorney, and his dad owned a 5-acre vineyard in Tallahassee. And he asked my dad, who was his CPA, he said, "How do you make money out of a vineyard?" And
Don't do it in Florida.
and my dad said, "Well, the only way I don't know make money out of a vineyard is probably make a little bit doing a U-pick or something like that, but probably to some value-added product like wine." And so he said, "Would you do a business plan on opening a winery?" And my dad had been to some wineries in California through some conferences I think he had in accounting, and said, "Sure." So he did the research on it and gave it to the attorney, and he said, "This looks pretty good. You know a lot of people that have money in Tallahassee that might can invest in this thing. I'm kind of ready to retire from practicing law. And so maybe you and I can be general partners. I'll do the work. You can kind of do the financial side, and we'll do this thing." And for whatever reason, my dad agreed. And they built the winery. They opened it in Tallahassee. It was built on, there's about 392 acres behind our house that I lived on. We lived on about 22 acres in Tallahassee on the
That
east
must have
side.
been gorgeous.
It was a nice place to grow up. We had cows and horses and a giant garden and
Yeah, but it was
whatnot.
just gorgeous.
And so there wasn't much traffic out that part of town back then. It's developed and grown up, as you might expect now. But so they did that. My job then, and I guess I was probably 11 or 12 at the time, was to mow the 392 acres.
Oh dear.
And so it had been abandoned for 20 or 30 years. It was an old peach orchard, apparently. And so every day that I didn't have school, I was on a tractor with a bush hog behind it, mowing this property. And part of it, most of it actually, all but about 40 acres, we developed into home sites. And so I was pretty much clearing all the lots and whatnot for that. And then working construction as they were building the winery itself. And when they opened the winery on the first day, I think they did something like $4,000. And the attorney came in and talking to my dad, and he says, "This is great. I think we're going to do $4,000 today." And my dad said, "I think we might have made a big mistake. I thought we were going to make $4,000 every day." And as that played out, and part of making a winery successful, especially in a place like Florida, is you've got to have people coming through the door. And Tallahassee isn't really a tourist destination.
Right.
I think probably at the time there were maybe 250,000 people that lived there. And so as it moved forward, it didn't go as well as they thought. And pretty soon the attorney said, "Okay, I'm going back to practice law. Here you go." And my dad said, "I can't just walk away from this thing. I've got all my friends invested in this thing." So he ended up kind of taking it over and going from there. And then we did Lake Ridge in 88, 89.
Where's Lake Ridge?
Lake Ridge is in Claremont, right outside of Orlando. Mm-hmm. So after the freezes in Central Florida, a gentleman that had been through the one in Tallahassee, he and his wife, met with my dad and said, "We should do one of these down in Claremont where all that agriculture land where the citrus grows. It's incredibly inexpensive land, and we've got a group that we could, help finance it as well." And so they invested, and probably not the best idea, but we went ahead and did another one there. And almost immediately that one did, with the traffic, going in and out of Orlando. You've got a pretty substantial group of people that live nearby in the Orlando area. So that one was doing probably 4 times what the one in Tallahassee was doing almost immediately. And then a couple years later, we actually ended up filing Chapter 11, closing the one in Tallahassee, merging everything down to the one in Central Florida, and hoping that might save it. And so at that time, I was in college. I went to Auburn in Alabama, and I had started off in architecture and then shifted to building science, and then kind of got bored with that because that kind of construction is what I had done all my life.
Yeah,
you already kind of teach you how to frame a wall, and I'm thinking, done additions to houses and all sorts of stuff. So I figured I didn't know much about economics, so I switched to business economics, and that was kind of boring after a while. And then I thought I need to get out of school, so I switched to marketing. And I had about 6 hours left before I graduated, and my dad got with me, and I had long stopped receiving money from back home. So I was working, actually. I'd started a little subcontracting construction business and was working when I wasn't going to school. And so he says, I need your help and I can't pay you very much. And I thought, well, I don't know what I'm going to do to help, but okay. So I moved down to Orlando, and we were trying to push wholesale at the time and trying to get retailers to take it. And so that's kind of where I started. And when you go in day after day to retailers, that either there's one of a couple of outcomes. Either they just start laughing at you right off the bat when you tell them you've got Florida wine, or they feel very sorry for you and buy a case just for pity, and thinking, I guess, they're going to keep me employed by coming to dust the wine every week. But pretty soon I said, I don't think the wholesale side is really going to make this thing work. We've got to focus on bringing people to the winery and, doing the tour, educating people about what we're doing, what grapes we're growing, that you can't actually make wine in Florida.
Was it still your brand back then, your label, or you weren't?
Yeah. So we had that brand is Lake Ridge. The original brand in Tallahassee was Lafayette. And then obviously we did San Sebastian later. And I think part of the reason we've done different brands every time and not just the same name again was if one worked and one didn't, then the one that didn't work, you shed off, and you've still got the one with the good reputation. Or at least I know that was kind of the thought when we did San Sebastian. We weren't positive this would work. The others had all had vineyards surrounding them. You could see all of the process right there, and this one was not going to be that. So we weren't sure how this one would work. But it turned out working pretty good. But that wasn't till 96.
So Tallahassee has some hilly areas. I know it's not, totally flat, but you don't need hills or more mountainous areas to grow grapes for wine?
Not necessarily.
Because every place that my husband's from Germany in a wine growing area, and when you drive around there, they're on the vineyard. I don't even know how to say the terminology.
Terraces.
Exactly. They're on terraced land. Go to California, it's more hilly, mountainous. I didn't realize that flat land was good for vineyards. And I don't even know why I didn't think like that. Like, why do I think that you need more hilly, mountainous areas? I don't know.
Well, and where most of our grapes are. So we've got 75 acres planted in Claremont, which is quite hilly in Claremont. We own 500 acres over in the Panhandle. About 135 of it, I think, is currently planted, maybe a little bit more. And that's relatively rolling hills over there as well. But it doesn't have to be that. There's a lot of very flat vineyards in California. I mean, you're talking thousands and thousands of acres in California.
Did you have any trouble when you first started with just all the diseases and pests and things that you can get on plants here in Florida because of the humidity? And
well, as long as you grow the right varieties, which we're predominantly growing native muscadines, which are native to the southeast, and they're resistant to most diseases, insects, that sort of thing. Now, and then when the area was first settled, they brought grapevines from Europe, and those are varieties of vinifera. Those vines they might grow for about 3 years, but in that third year, they're starting to see pretty intense disease pressure, and they'll essentially die within 5-6 years. But you don't really get fruit till 4 or 5 years, so by the time they're starting to fruit is about the time they're about to die based on they can't handle it in this climate.
I had Bo Sturck on one of my shows. He's a beekeeper and kind of a go-to expert around here. Do vineyards need bees to pollinate their plants?
Some are self-pollinating, some are not. So it just kind of depends on what varieties you've got planted.
And
There's like 100 varieties of muscadines. And a lot of them, what we choose is ones that ripen very evenly so we can harvest it all at the same time. Some of them ripen very unevenly, and that's usually what you'd find in like a U-pick vineyard or something like that.
you must think about hurricanes in a very different way from most people, owning vineyards and having.
Well, that's when we harvest. Is our harvest happens to be right during hurricane season, so that's always fun. And when I say fun, not so much.
Right, right. So you can't just, oh, the hurricane's coming, we have to harvest now. If they're not ready, they're not ready, right?
Correct. When you've got to have sugar levels, pH, everything's got to be within a window, and that's when you want to harvest. So we're checking it once we get close. Our winemakers typically checking, every day, and in all of our vineyards. So we're sending samples from all of the different ones across the state. Not only just ours that we own, because we contract with some other growers as well to get the amount of fruit we need. And it's kind of one of those things. Once it's time, it's okay. We're going to harvest, tomorrow or the next day or something of that nature. And
You must stress in hurricane season like crazy.
well, I'll tell you, there's all parts of business these days, no matter what you do, that are stressful. The people that are probably incredibly stressed at the time are our vineyard manager and some of our vineyard crew and our production crew, that they go on to a 24/7 rotation at that point for the better part of a month. That's much more stressful. And I've done that job too, and it's not pleasant, but it is what it is, and you got one chance to get it. It's not like a regular retail store where you just order more of whatever you sell. We get one chance throughout the year to bring in the harvest, and that's going to provide us for, usually we try to get enough for about an 18-month supply in case there's some spike in demand or something like that. Then we've got enough until the next harvest, and you get that one ready.
So I want to talk about the St. Augustine location, but before we do that, from listening to you, your father, maybe both your parents, but your father really had you working at a young age and gave you a lot of responsibility and a lot of freedom, it sounds like, but also you started very young realizing that I've got to pull my weight around here, and I can't just sit back and do nothing. Do you have kids?
I do not. I think my kids are the 115-ish people that work at all the winery locations. But, yeah, my sister and I both, I think, were expected to work.
Yeah, you can tell.
At a very young age. I can remember when I was, I don't know, I must have been about 6. So she might have been 11. It might have even been a little bit before that. I mentioned the part about we had a vineyard. So this was like a 5-acre vineyard, and we grew all sorts of stuff. And my granddad would meet her at the house at like 4:30 in the morning on a Saturday, and they would pick okra or whatever was in season, and he would then carry her to the farmer's market, and she would sell it to some of the farmers. And I was probably too young to do it, but probably at that time I was thinking, boy, that's awfully early to get up and pick okra. That doesn't seem like too much fun to me. And so, but that was, what she did. She's been, from that point on, she's been an entrepreneur all of her life. She ended up renovating houses. She's an interior decorator, and I think she's bought and flipped, 40-something houses, and she's lived in most of them, which I always found interesting. I don't like to move. We stayed in the same house from the time I was born until the time I left, and there was no interest in moving. So we weren't, that family that moved around a lot. She has moved around a lot, and we always scratch our head like, what is wrong with her? We don't like to do that. Where did that come from?
But that's because of what she does. I mean, I can tell you from owning a real estate brokerage, I think I'm done, and then I go in to show a house, and I go, oh, I kind of like this house.
She said she was done, and this was the last one many times, and we always just laugh every time she says it.
Yeah, I built my last house 6 times.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting that your parents I don't think it's so easy to raise kids. I have two kids, and I tried. I grew up in a small farm community in Wisconsin, and we were, kind of like what you had. I mean, we had jobs when we were young, and no, everybody worked, and it's just how it was. And so I had my kids working. They pulled weeds, they cleaned the house, they did stuff around the house when they were younger. I think that's harder and harder to do now. And I wonder how that changes as then the future employees that we have, because as kids, when you start out working young, you just get this work ethic, and it just happens. And you also have to know how to deal with people because you just get that, And I always think owning a business, how I think it's going to be so difficult in the future to find employees who have that in them, because I don't see that happening as much anymore.
I don't either, and I think it's kind of sad.
Yeah, and a lot of parents don't give their kids the freedom that it takes to just go find out how to make it in life, right? Like you, as a young 16 years old, you're driving to St. Augustine by yourself, and then with your girlfriend.
Well, and I don't recall thinking it was unusual.
That's what I mean.
It was, we had jobs. I never got a choice. I laughed. A lot of my friends, they ask their kids what they want for dinner, or what they want to do over the weekend, and I don't recall ever getting
we
asked.
Didn't get a choice,
and it was just, this was what we had for dinner. We all sat there, and my mom was a great cook, and we all sat at the table and had dinner together and talked about whatever we talked about.
Yeah, and you didn't not eat it.
Oh no, that was not an option. There was one time we got to not eat, and it was because my dad didn't like it, and it was this thing that my mother tried once, and it was, imagine broccoli and Jell-O put together.
Oh, Jell-O was so big back then.
And we all looked at it, and we just immediately looked at him, thinking, "There's no way we can eat this. But if he eats it, we're done." And so he took one bite and said, "Is there anything else?" And my sister and I were just like, "Oh, thank God." But other than that, there weren't many fails. And my mother taught me a lot about cooking as well, so I cook a lot now. But back to your question about having children, it wasn't that I didn't want to have kids or that I made that conscious decision. It was about that time in my life. So when I opened San Sebastian, 25, just turned 26 when we actually opened it, but when we started the process, I was 25. And my goal was to still get the company successful. When I moved down to Lake Ridge, when we were in bankruptcy in 92, we made a lot of changes, got out of wholesale, started changing how we did the tour, took over the retail room, started doing events. We came out of bankruptcy a year later, started having pretty good success at bringing people through the winery and selling the wine 100% out of the winery itself. And then in 95, 96 is when we did San Sebastian. And remembering from when I visited when I was 16, but also when we were doing the original renovation of the original building that we bought there at King Street, I was coming up 2 or 3 times a week. After we had Lynn Weeks doing some of the remodeling of the first building, and after his crew would leave at 4:30, whatever time they knocked off, my dad and I would show up, and then we would do whatever else till 11:30 at night. But I remember every time I would get here in the afternoon, I would leave Central Florida. I would get here, and I swear it was 10 degrees cooler. There was a nice breeze. And I never was a big fan of Central Florida. I always thought it was relatively the hottest place on the planet. Later, I went to Mexico and decided maybe it's actually Mexico might be the hottest in July. But it poured down rain at 4:30 every day and was just steam everywhere. And so I thought, it doesn't matter where I live, I'm going to have to go back and forth between these two places anyway. So I moved up here and have been here, I guess, this will be 30 years this year.
You said the King Street building. Were you originally in a different place than where you are now?
No, it's just we hadn't added on to it yet, so it was just that original rectangular 2-story brick building that was on the corner.
Was that a Flagler era building?
It was. Henry Flagler built it as part of the East Coast Railway building. So, the offices were across the street, the 3 towers. That was essentially record storage, and it was built in 1924. And then when we bought it, we just renovated that space. So it was 2 relatively open floors, kind of warehouses. So it was 3,000 square feet on each floor, and we had our retail room, some production, the tasting bar, and then the second floor had the barrel room, as it still is today. And that was where the tour started with the video up there.
Did you find anything interesting in the renovation in that building?
No, not really. Probably the most interesting part is the police department was storing stolen bikes in there when we got it. So they had been the city owned it at that point, so they were using it for storage a little bit themselves. But there were no unique artifacts or anything like that.
Was it haunted?
I think some people have made up stories that it might have been haunted, and I even heard some story about when they were building it. Some guy, the stairs weren't in, and some guy fell, and I'm thinking, how could you possibly know that? I don't know that. I've never heard that. So I think people sometimes make stuff up to make their story a little bit better about a place.
I don't know if do you remember Vera Kramer? She lived in Abbott Tract. She's from England. She's British. She and her husband, and they owned the massive mansion in Abbott Tract, Lucy Abbott's old mansion, the great big one. I had that listing for a while, and she said there was a ghost in there, a friendly ghost. It was a 3 or 4 story huge place, and and she told me when I took the listing, there's a ghost in here. And so people would come through and they would always ask, is this place haunted? And at first I said, no. Because, you can't prove, I'm not lying. I don't believe in that. And then I could tell that they were kind of disappointed. They wanted it to be haunted. So I said, well, the owner does say there's a friendly ghost. And they just love that. I thought, I'm never going to sell this thing if I talk about it being haunted. And I quickly realized, no, wrong tactic. Yes, there's a ghost.
Well, depending on who you're selling to, probably it goes either way there.
So you opened in 96 here, or you bought. And did you open or buy it?
We opened it in December of 96.
Just to get more people through the doors and more about the tours of it, correct?
So why we would do a second location, what we did know from the previous experience is you don't duplicate all your cost. So pretty much your management team, your production team can pretty much remain the same. You just have the ability to open another retail location, but also to tell your story, develop another brand. And so while we were renovating, I was working with a graphic designer that we worked with down in Central Florida. And so we created, and a lot of this would happen in the middle of the night, that I was sketching out designs for labels or ads or whatever and faxing them to her so she could actually create them on the computer. And then I would stop by her house on the way home back to Central Florida the next morning or whatever, review all the stuff that she had put together and make whatever tweaks.
Good thing you didn't have kids because you're working all the time.
Exactly. I didn't really have time, I couldn't afford them if I did have them. And so we were doing all that. And then I think from start to finish, it was 3 months to renovate it, develop the
That's
brand.
the fastest Len has ever worked.
Yeah, it was. It was a quick turnaround.
Perfection is not fast.
No, we kind of had that as part of the deal when we first started. If we get this, we need to do it quickly and get this thing open.
I need the key to quick for Len. I need to know that key.
well, this was 30 years ago. So
he is a
we were all faster back then.
Fast.
we were all faster back then. Myself very much included. So I think of construction projects that I would take on myself or whatever back then that I now start calling somebody and say, hey, doesn't your crew want to do this for me?
I just painted my front door this past weekend. I painted the exterior and then I painted a different color on the interior. So my husband took it off, and I had it in the garage and just taking the door off and carrying it. We're like, this is hard. Just for a silly door.
Yeah.
Getting it back on. Like, oh, I don't want to do this again. He said, do you like this color? I said, no, but I'm keeping it.
Yeah.
Not doing this again. So St. Augustine was kind of seasonal still in 96 because it was the winter, like after September, it rolled up back then.
Very much so.
Did you get enough people to really make it worth it in the beginning?
It probably started for the first maybe 6 months a little bit slower than we had hoped, but then once we kind of got established, it started growing pretty good after that, and we were happy. So we essentially were able to double our sales without doubling all of our cost by having another brand and another retail location, because at that time we were still 99% of our sales were right out of the wineries themselves. As we kind of built that, it didn't happen until maybe 7 or 8 years later that the wholesale started, and it was more of the consumer pulling it through the marketplace at that point, which I found very quickly it works much better that way than the way that we were trying to shove it through originally. But it really started with the Publix on the beach. That I was in there one day shopping. I used to live on the island when I first moved over here. And the manager asked me how he could carry our wines. And I wasn't wearing anything that said San Sebastian. I didn't know how he knew who I was. I think I asked him, how do you know who I am? And he said, I know who you are. And I said, well, you tell me. We'd be happy to sell you our wines. And so he got me a packet basically to fill out and said, send this to our corporate headquarters in Lakeland and it'll get you approved and then I can buy it. Okay. So I think I left there and filled it out in about 15 minutes and sent it off, and I never heard anything. And so a few weeks later, I'm shopping in there again, and he says, hey, are you going to fill out that thing? I said, I filled it out the day you gave it to me, and I mailed it in. And what I didn't know is his dad was the corporate attorney for Publix and sat right next to the CEO at the time in the office next to him.
Always who you know, isn't it?
And so we got approved like that day.
Yeah.
And
Always
we started
like
selling it to, I would just deliver it over there, it'd be 2 or 3, 5 cases a week, something like that.
And it had the San Sebastian label?
Yeah, that was San Sebastian. And then they moved their managers around periodically to different stores. And so they opened, I think, the World Golf Village, and he brought it in over there. Then they opened Cobblestone, and he brought it in there. And so now I'm delivering these 3. And we had a guy on staff that he was from Chicago, an older gentleman, and he at some point worked for the Teamsters Union. But he was getting older, and he says, I can't do tours as good as I used to and get around, but if you ever do wholesale, I'd be interested in doing that.
Oh, I bet he has a lot of experience.
And so I said, this is kind of gaining in popularity. Why don't you just next week take off, go to as many Publix or Winn-Dixie's or whatever, and just see if there's any interest in any other ones. And so he comes back like a week later. This is before cell phones, and so I didn't have any real communication with him. And he throws this stack of papers on my desk, and I said, "What's this?" And he says, "They're orders." And there was like 17 orders, and I said, how do you expect me to deliver this? And he says, well, that's your problem, not my problem. I said, I just meant go see if there's any interest, not take the orders. So don't do anything else. And we went and bought a box truck, and my warehouse guy at the time, I asked him if he'd be willing to do the deliveries, and he said, sure. And so then it went from there. And
yeah, don't put an old Teamsters guy in charge of selling stuff.
We built it pretty good before we turned it over to a distributor. We have the ability to self-distribute, and so we got it up to 35,000 cases a year, and then we turned it over to a distributor, and now it kind of vacillates from year to year, but it's up around 90,000 cases that we sell through all of the
The distribution
wine shops
networks.
and
Yeah.
retailers and whatnot. And then we sell about that much as well at the wineries themselves.
And so originally you didn't have a restaurant and a rooftop bar and all of that, right? And that's, I love that. I used to live on Valencia Street, and we had a hot tub out and back, and I loved the music from the rooftop.
Mhm.
I could hear it. I know some people they don't want any noise downtown. They say it's too noisy, but I loved it. And there were certain nights where we could tell, oh, that's the good one. That's our favorite.
Well, that's the thing. I think we had people like you that really liked it.
I mean, that's why
We had some people that didn't like it, but it was funny. We had this one individual that would call and chew us out about how loud the music was, the night before or whatever. But it became a pattern that when certain people played, he didn't call. It was like, it's only if he doesn't like the music that he calls and fusses about it. But
And listen, you can go live places where nothing goes on and there's no activity, there's no vibrancy, there's no people, there's no traffic. There are options in life. But if you live downtown in a vibrant urban core in a tourism economy, why are you going to complain about a rooftop bar playing great music? Like, come on.
well, I think everybody's view of great music is probably a little different, and that's fine. But and sometimes it depends too which way the wind's blowing, what time of year it is, or there are leaves on all the trees. And so
absolutely.
it probably got very
I
much
can attest to that.
louder during certain
Yeah.
perfect scenarios that might exist than others. And
Well, I always enjoyed it.
and sometimes the musicians, I think they've been doing it so long they can't hear so good, so they keep turning it up and up. And you kind of want it to be enjoyable for everybody. So there's been many times we've tried to tell them, hey, you gotta turn it down so people can hear themselves. And now it's kind of evolved over the years as well from what we even built originally when we added on. So that was in like 2002. It was the kind of wine and jazz bar that was supposed to be kind of mellow and just kind of a cool place to hang out. And then the interior spot that's covered in there was essentially for banquets and wedding receptions and corporate parties.
Yep, I remember.
And then that evolved right about the time of the recession, 2007, 2008, that nobody really wanted to pay for big wedding receptions and all the expenses that come with that, and corporate stuff went down as well. So it made it a lot easier. We just turned the whole third floor into the bar, and that worked well and served us well. And we've kind of added little things here and there over time. But then, as you know, probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, La Cucina was over at the beach, took over that space, and even upped the game even further.
Yeah,
They're
that was
doing
a
a great job.
That was just a brilliant move because they have such a local following and their food is so good and they're creative, and it just was a great move on your part and on their part. I'm so happy that they were able to find another location. It's not easy to do that. I'm in that business. It's not easy. And I think that they've added to the offerings downtown, and I'm sure that it's increased traffic for you as well at the winery. I'm really glad that they went in there.
I am too. I've known him for 19 plus years, and we've always talked about doing something together anyway, so it was just kind of perfect timing for both of us. And I know I couldn't be happier. He does a great job. I think he increases the visibility of the winery.
For sure.
And certainly kind of ups the game up there.
Yeah,
So
his
we're proud of
little
him.
hole in the wall lunch place at the Ponce is one of my favorite.
Yeah.
I've had, in fact, I had a county commissioner, met her there for a meeting once, and she said, I didn't even know this place existed. And then Len's wife, Christy, I met her there.
Yeah.
She said, I never knew this place existed. I'm like, this is the best.
Yeah. There's a lot of little places like that around.
You can always get a table, and usually there's somebody you know. Food's always good.
Mm-hmm.
So you went through the whole Wally Devlin, I'm going to develop this whole area project back in the early 2000s, and that didn't go anywhere. And then, Abbas and Baiji were going to do their whole project, and we don't yet know what's happening there. But you've been through a few iterations of, we're going to develop this whole thing and make it a big entertainment lodging complex.
I think I'm going through the sixth one now.
Yeah. And here you still are.
Yeah, we're still there.
Successfully holding it down.
A boss and his family are still moving kind of around on their piece of it. A number of years ago, 5 years ago, we bought about 2.5 acres that surrounds the winery there. So we own to the water along King Street that we're in process of developing that little piece, our piece, and fixing the parking situation that has been a situation, I'll call it, for pretty much the whole time we've been there.
Well, there were different iterations of getting more parking that were going to happen.
Oh, well, when we first got there, it was, really soon that there was going to be all of the infrastructure done with 240 parking places, and they were going to sell pad sites around originally. And then they've had multiple developers come in, and there was always kind of the criteria. There'd be a hotel, there'd be restaurant, there'd be some retail, there'd be this mixed use development. And there's been some good options I thought that were put forward. There's been some that we didn't really care for. And most of those were kind of people, I think, that wanted our piece of the parking and liked our corner spot there. But we were the first ones there, so that's what we got. That's what was there, and so it was available. But we'll see what happens. They built the first hotel down there on Riberia, and it's open. And I think there's a restaurant site right next to it coming down behind the police station, Sebastian Harbor. And then they're building the marina facilities building, and I think there's even some lodging on top of that. And then once they finish that, then I believe they'll open the marina and then come around to the point there where there's another hotel and then a parking garage kind of behind us. And then our place has parking in another building between us and the river there.
So what's your next iteration? What's coming next for the winery?
Well, we've talked about for a while a European market that we would build between us and the water that would have lots of vendors in it, like you might see in a market that might show up in any European town, or they might take an old train station and turn it into. So you'd have a butcher, you'd have a florist, you'd have lots of different unique items locally sourced and whatnot.
My husband, I told you, he's from Germany. He always wanted to do a Christmas market downtown in the plaza, which, as you know, the city won't allow, nor will they allow it much on Francis Field either. But he always thought that would be such a good idea to do a big, authentic German Christmas market. And, the Colonial Oak has done a little one. It's quite small, but it is the same concept.
Yeah. They're pretty successful when people have done them correctly. When I first got here, they had most of the festivals were in the plaza.
Yeah.
So you'd have art shows, or you'd have. I remember the first time I went to the seafood festival, which was last weekend. It was down there.
Yep.
And so, they moved that out.
So, what makes a good glass of wine?
Whichever one you like the best. I like music. It's unique to the individual, and that's why we make so many different ones. Is we realize everybody likes something different, and we want to have different parts of the portfolio filled so that hopefully they find one during the tasting that they like. I don't find that anybody's going to like them all, and I find it hard to believe that somebody wouldn't find at least one that they like. And so, we've got dry to sweet, red and white, sparkling wine, a port, cream sherry.
Sparkling wine seems like it's really getting trendy in the last year or two.
In the past couple of years, in the entire industry, and I'm kind of referring to beer, wine, spirits, the only one that's seen some increases is sparkling wine, which I don't know why. It's such a small portion of the overall sales, and maybe that's why. If it bumps just a little bit, it bumps, but people seem to have gotten into it.
Yeah, when we visited my husband's friends in Germany, they're real close friends of ours, and when we all get together, and we drink a lot of wine. They're on the French-German border, and a couple years ago, I noticed they'd switched to Prosecco, they never had that before. They weren't, we all got together and it was just reds, but now they are really, a couple of years ago, they were really into Prosecco. And so that's when I first saw the switch.
Mm-hmm.
And I like red. I just really like red. Is it harder to produce white or red, or does it matter? Is it the production of it equally as simple?
It's
or
an
hard?
extra step because you press out the whites on first pass. So you crush the grapes, put them in the press that fruit out. It goes to a tank. It starts racking and clarifying and whatnot. The reds take an extra step, so you crush them. Then you put everything in the tank. So it's skin, seeds, everything. And you let that sit for 3 to 5 days, a little bit higher temperature, so it's drawing that color out. So that's how you get the color in reds. Then you go back and press it out afterwards. So it's a little more challenging because getting the skins and everything back out of the tank is not necessarily an easy task. It's easier now because they've developed tanks specifically for that are sloped on the bottom, but it wasn't always that way. And before that, you dug it out. So you drain the wine that's in there, move it to another tank, and you've got all these skins and seeds. And I'm talking like in a 5,000 gallon tank, you've got 4 or 5 feet of it that's kind of packed in there. And you've got a little hole that's about the size for a person to get through. And you start shoveling it out of there. And the times I've done it, about 5 or 6 hours later, you get to where you can get it out because you've made enough of it so where you can get in the tank and start shoveling it out. It's not a fun experience.
Is there a lot of byproduct in making wine?
Not really, because the skins and seeds, we do 2 things. We either sell it to somebody that dries it out, grinds it up, and does nutraceuticals with it. Because there's a lot of good compounds in, especially muscadines, in the skins and the seeds. And then if we don't do that, then we basically compost it and spread it back over the vineyard and use it as a natural fertilizer.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Selling it to nutraceutical companies. I never would have thought of that.
That's gotten
but I get
big
what you're
in the
saying. It
past
makes
like
sense.
15 years, yeah.
Do you think AI will change your industry a lot?
Well, in essence, our industry hasn't changed in 1,000 years. And so I think it'll change parts of it. It might make some tests faster. It might make some of our marketing a little easier or quicker or something like that. But I don't think I don't know how it would change the actual process. The process is what it is. And
the automation has already probably happened as much as
any of the automation. The automation probably more so at this point is, bottling lines and so forth that we've done years ago. Occasionally we might add a new piece to the bottling line, but for the most part, it's completely automated now.
Tell me a little bit about, we talked earlier, I don't want to get political, but tell me a little bit about what it was like when Nights of Lights first started. I mean, you guys must have just, I'm sure no one could predict what it is now, but you must have been so thankful back then for any idea that might draw people here in the winter. Because it shut down. It was
very slow back then. That was right about the time we got here. It was within a year or two that I think it was Lynn Weeks and Boots Badson and some others that started it. But it was, I remember going to Attractions Association's meetings, and from November through the holidays into January, it was incredibly slow, and everybody was kind of in a bad mood at these meetings talking about how slow it was. We sold wine, and so in the holidays we sell a lot of wine. And so it probably was a little different for us, but I saw what was happening in town, and there wasn't much going on. And like any event, and we've developed a lot of events at the other winery especially, they grow over time, and they get bigger and bigger, and you do have to manage it. and
And you
somebody
can't
has
go
to.
backwards either.
No, it's very tough to go backwards. Um, but I think long term there needs to be an individual or a group of individuals that manages it, and I think there's a lot of great opportunities that we still haven't seen that could come from it, that could be very entertaining for locals and for visitors and everything. But what it has done, in what you always want in business, is kind of a steady flow of both attendance and income. And these huge spikes are very difficult.
Yeah, it's stressful.
It's kind of like some realtors when you get a commission on a house and then you don't sell one for 2 months.
Mhm.
You're living off the one you
Mhm.
got a few months
Yeah.
ago, and
It's
it's
hard to
tough for people
plan.
to do that. Any commission based
Yeah, it's
uh,
hard to keep employees.
job
You can't.
is tough. The employees is significant because it's tough to ramp up and down.
Yeah,
And especially if in a couple of months it's going to get busy.
Yeah.
But how do I give these people hours that they need to keep them? Because it's usually less expensive to keep them than it is to retrain new ones
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
And you care for your employees too. These are people that work very hard for you, and you're especially so. I have a lot of people that I work with that have been there a long time, like some just a few years after we opened that are still there.
What a credit to you that is.
Well, I guess it is. I'm thankful for it,
To
and
retain employees like that, that's a real credit.
I come across a lot of places that aren't like that, and I don't really want to insert myself, but there's a reason typically.
Oh, for sure.
And but what it ends up, you end up. These are my friends at this point. We know way too much about each other, all of us, and that's fine. But we help each other out all the time, and we make allowances for issues that good or bad that people might be dealing with, and we make it work. Everybody kind of sticks up for everybody else. So I think we've got, I don't know, over 10 people that have been there a lot more than 10 years. So,
Oh, that's great.
yeah. And that's just here. The other winery is, I think we've got 65 people, and probably 25 or 30 have been there more than 15 or 20 years.
That is a real credit to you.
Well, thank you.
How many wineries are there in Florida?
Well, if you saw a stat, somebody would tell you there's 50 or 60.
Really?
But there's not. There's a lot of people that have a winery license, but they don't really operate a winery as you would think a winery to be. They might be importing some product, something like that, and they're just calling themselves a winery.
Slap a label on it.
And so sometimes it's already got a label on it. But true wineries, like what you and I would think a winery is, I think there's maybe 15.
Wow, I never would have thought that.
Some are.
That's surprising to me.
Most of them are very small. Our two produce and sell probably 80% of the wine that's made in Florida.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I feel like you must have really fun business trips, because owning a winery, I just picture, okay, we're going to go do this, and we write this off, and we write this off, and we write this off.
Well, I guess that's the thing I didn't inherit from my dad. I wasn't a CPA, and so I forget to write all the stuff off whenever it probably would qualify. But
you can write a lot of fun things off because you're doing market research. I have a friend who his mother owns a med spa, and the stuff she gets to write off, she goes and tries all these procedures, or I don't even know because I don't do any of that. But he's always telling me, oh yeah, my mom went to this place and it's a write-off.
yeah. I usually get back from any kind of wine-related trip and think, oh, I spent way too much money on wine.
What's your favorite kind of wine? Besides your own. I don't want to let you answer any of your own labels.
Well, variety-wise or region?
I would say variety.
Variety, probably Cabernet Sauvignon. Region, West Bank of Bordeaux. But then I like a lot of California stuff too. So.
My favorite is a good deep Zin. I love
Mm-hmm.
just a full-bodied Zinfandel.
A few months ago, I was out in Healdsburg and Sonoma and out through there. They're doing a lot of good Zins. So that was one of the trips I spent way too much money. I brought back a lot of Zins. So.
Well, our time is up. I have to tell you, I feel like this show went faster than any other show that I've talked to anyone on. So thank you.
Oh, you probably say that every time.
No. It was really interesting for me. Thank you.
Well,
and
thank you.
I just want to, I really want to applaud you for creating what I think is obviously a unique thing that you can do and see in St. Augustine, but also it's not, people complain about, it's just a bunch of tchotchke shops downtown or something. I don't agree with that, but yours is, it's an attraction. It's a place to eat. It's a place to hang out and have fun. That's really unique and different, and I think draws the kind of visitor that I think most people would say they want. So kudos to you for creating that, keeping it going. I know that's not easy, mm-hmm. and the fact that it's thriving.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And I also want to thank you for your time on the TDC. We didn't talk about that, but he also serves on the board for the Tourism Development Council. And so just knowing someone that's been here a long time, helping to make the decisions on where our tourism dollars go, that's important. Mm-hmm. You got to have some history on how we got here.
I agree.
So
100%.
Thank you for doing that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for tuning into this episode. I appreciate it, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.